Today I'm speaking with Jenean Jessen. Janine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a while. We were chatting back in November about doing this, and it's taken us a while to get on the same schedule, but I'm glad it worked out. I was so glad to finally be able to chat with you and dive into your story. So thank you for doing this. And for anyone who doesn't know Janine, I just wanted to give a brief bio and then have Janine fill us in on a little bit more about what she does. Jenean Jessen is a licensed practical nurse, a sex coach, and she believes in the transformation love of the Lord and the power of sacred sexuality. Is that all correct so far?
Yes, but we'll have more
clarification.
Transformative things to talk about with that statement. Yes.
Good. Well, I do want to start with that because I do want to also mention to people who are watching, I'm not always going to interview atheists. I'm not always going to interview people that would agree with Richard Dawkins, who think we came from primates and there's no higher power. I'm one of them. I agree with Richard Dawkins strongly, but not everyone I interview is going to be like that. And we need to have more voices in the equation and to try to see people that think differently than us, to have them speak to different subjects and learn from them because they have some good things to say too. So I just want to start with that. I know there's a lot more there that you're doing, and I think you were recently getting your certifications and so forth. So could you tell us more about what you do and even your non-professional work as well?
Yes. Okay. So yes, I'm a licensed practical nurse. I've been in pediatric home care primarily. My work life, my spirit life has all been very connected. I'm not sure where to begin with that, but yes, it's been a path. My spirit-led path has always led me to work that was very much in line with my spiritual guidance. So a lot of changes started happening in my life back in 2014. I would say I started a spiritual deconstruction experience. So I'm still very much navigating through a very intense, what I actually call, feels more like I entered into my own personal 7-year tribulation.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. And I do want to go into some of that for whatever you feel comfortable with. Could I ask, in terms of the sex coaching, did I hear you were just working on your certification for that?
Yes, so I actually completed my certification, and I have been taking a few months to just pour into myself. And as we know, with everything that's happened in the world with coronavirus, and I had actually left where I'm living back in 2018. I sold my house, really wanted to pour myself into this career change, but really what started happening was the intensity of the spiritual deconstruction process while simultaneously desiring to step into new things. And really wanting to push through that. And everything pretty much crashed last year and brought me back to New York, back to my old nursing job.
So you're in New York City?
Nope, Central New York. I'm in New York. Yep. And so I'm kind of sitting in the settling of it all. Like I shared, I completed my certification. And I'm taking this time to really integrate and process these experiences, and then let me see how I want to build this business, because what I give back out into the world and being authentic and, working with integrity, because even the whole coaching world, the healing world has their own many flavors to it. And so that's a very new world for me too. And it's like a new birthing process, I guess, would be the best way to put it. But maybe as we navigate through the interview, some core things haven't changed for me, even from 20 years ago, which is a deep desire to see sexual wholeness and healing within the world. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I would definitely want to stay in touch too, and maybe do a follow-up at some point just to hear how your work with that is going and how it evolves from here. I know we're going to dive into a lot about the sexuality concepts, but just to give a little bit more background, could you tell us, number one, just tell us something about yourself just for current times, a hobby or something you like to do. And then if you could, we'd like to dive into your story. Like, how did you grow up, and what was, especially as it relates to, any kind of, God or the Bible, anything that tells us where you're coming from.
Okay. All right. Right now, what I really love to do to de-stress, I'm an avid reader. This both offline, Kindle, everything, and I love to dance. That's
Nice.
yeah.
What kind of dancing do you do?
Pretty much free flow.
Okay.
But I am getting into belly dancing, and I have a lot of I want to get into booty yoga, and I'm really looking forward to this season of my life to be able to do that, because I have a daughter who's grown and I'm completely living on my own and working part-time, so I have that space to fill. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Do you do ballroom dancing at all?
No
No?
ballroom
Okay.
dancing, no.
Gotcha. That's more my background, but
Really?
I'm not good at it, but I did take quite a few classes on it. I'd love to get back to it at some point. It's fun.
Oh, that's so cool. How long did you do it for?
Several years. I forget exactly how long, but it was just enough to know that I wasn't very good at it. Enough to know that I needed to take more classes. But it is fun. It's fun to at least get get the muscle memory started.
Yeah. Belly dancing's really hard too. It looks easy. It's not.
I believe it. So what's your background like? Where are you coming from with theologically? Not to start with a loaded question or anything. Well, let's start with this. What were your what was your home life like? Like, what did your parents believe?
Okay, so my parents had me young. They were 20 when they had me. My dad was a musician. My mom was an artist and a dancer, and they were both raised Catholic. So that's pretty much the first few years of my life. You know, I have a lot of early childhood memories of my home, but not the Catholic Church per se. I had a godmother who became a born again Christian, I think, when I was 5. So that was a huge influence with my parents. And they started going to an Assembly of God church, which that's a charismatic Pentecostal denomination. And so
that's what you grew up in as a young child?
I grew up in, yeah.
Okay.
So
does that include like the whole speaking in tongues and prophetic visions kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they sent me to Christian school, which was actually, I think, a very grounding experience for me, because my parents struggled a lot they were young when they had me, lots of different jobs, lots of moving. So church was kind of a grounding place, and Jesus was always a very comforting character in my life, I guess you could say. Yeah. So that's where it started.
Was there a time when you got what we would call like an altar call or a salvation call, where they said, you may know about God and you may have the songs in your head and the verses on your tongue, but you actually need to make a profession of faith that, yes, I'm a sinner in need of the cross and the grace that God gives me through Jesus's death and resurrection?
So interestingly, I don't have that vivid, like the way you just portrayed it in my childhood. I don't remember it being that portrayed to me in such a way. I remember there always being prayer time in school. I do not remember it being in a church service. I do remember giving my heart to Jesus in school. And I did become a little evangelist, like to the neighborhood kids. And my parents
Which you're supposed to do, right?
Yes. Yeah. My parents had separated when I was about 6 or 7. My mom and I went to live with my grandmother, and I met one of my childhood best friends who lived up the road. And I basically witnessed to her. She went through a really hard experience. Her parents were divorcing. Her dad committed suicide, and she ended up coming to my church, I even school for a little bit, but then they went to a different Assembly of God church. But she gave her life to the Lord during that season, and events did like a 180. She stayed the path, and I actually went in like complete rebellion and pretty quickly.
As you do.
Yeah. But we used to make pictures together, my friend and I, and sell them to the neighborhood kids, and we gave the money to the pastor for missions. So like that was, we were all in.
It's funny. So what is the rebellious side of it look like? What happened there?
My thinking mind started noticing that none of my prayers for my family were actually working, and Christians were all starting to look like a bunch of hypocrites. and heavy metal was a lot more truer to life than what I was seeing between home life and church life. And I just started having this little angst inside of me and really didn't want to have anything to do with it. And interestingly, my parents couldn't afford the private school anymore. So by the end of 5th grade, I was in public school. And then middle school was 6th, 7th, and 8th. And that's where I went. And it was a huge culture shock because I don't even know, maybe 100 kids at, the Christian school, and then this to 1,000 kids in a city school district in Poughkeepsie, actually. So yeah, it was, and I didn't have a lot of guidance during those years. And I hooked up with a crowd. I was really initiated into the crowd that, I learned how to sneak out of my house and smoke and drink and, who will buy you alcohol and, all with between 11 and 12, like that. Yeah, I was so young.
Can I ask, just as maybe a precursor to some of our discussions about sexuality, just the time frame of puberty and the issue of people explaining kind of what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mind, how to be responsible with all that. Did you feel like you had a good preparation for that time, or what was that like for you?
No, it was horrible. No preparation whatsoever. And I developed really young. I went through puberty very young. I was actually in elementary school going through puberty. So by the time I entered middle school, I was pretty much almost done. Just in honor of my family dynamics, my mom was sexually abused as a child, and that was in our family history. So I am the generation of those who had that experience, navigated through and pretty much the effects of that. And my mom did not know how to guide me in that area. I think she probably disassociated from me. I don't think she knew how to handle what I was going through. And I had a younger sibling, so she put a lot of her energy into that. My cousins, big Italian, extended Italian family. So we always had aunties, cousins, around each other all the time.
Probably some good food too, I'd imagine.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. And so I think, and a very creative family. So there was no, I pretty much sat in front of the TV, watched MTV all the time, listened to music. Madonna was my role model, and I spent hours in my room dancing to kind of like shut myself out, away from it. But I was so sexualized, like in my world, but also the religious aspect was you have to wait until you're married to do this. There was still a very strong belief that sex outside of marriage was wrong. I think I cultivated a desire and an ethic that I had wanted to wait until I was 16 and be in love. Like that was what my inner goal was, but I didn't have any guidance around me on how to actually cultivate that. I was not in an environment where boundaries were developed. And yeah, so it deeply affected my sexual experiences.
With hitting puberty early, did you feel like that brought any level of shame or embarrassment? I know for different people that's a very different experience, but in terms of I think some subsections, maybe you call them, of Christianity, I think there's just this sense of you need to be so modest that you're not attracting a guy's eye. And I would just imagine, not being a woman, but I'd imagine that if you have more curves than other women, or you have them at a different age, when other girls don't, that might tempt you to think, I'm probably needing to be more covered up, more modest, more careful with how I conduct myself, as opposed to if I was just looking like a little girl still in elementary school, I could just kind of do whatever and not think about it too much. Did it feel like it kind of pushed the modesty or even the purity culture to you at all?
No, okay. Not at all. Actually, I didn't come in contact with the purity culture until many years later. So we can
Okay.
dive into that after. But no, for me, I had to wear a uniform, which definitely didn't exemplify any curves or anything. And because it was only during elementary school, I think I broke out of that rather quickly. And the way that I think I might have dressed a little more baggy around my family. But when I went out with my friends, it was the short crop tops. This was late 80s, early 90s, the hair out to here, the tight jeans, the
I
leather
remember.
boots. And I remember getting comments. I had an uncle, he was kind of like our adopted uncle, very into the church, but an Italian too. So it's like, what's that lace top underneath this? It's a lot of that kind of energy, what's this lace top under this baggy plaid, shirt you're wearing?
Yep.
Know what she's doing when she leaves this house. It was that kind of like a strong Italian,
Yeah. Like be careful, be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I'm glad that you didn't have the shame of it, because I do think that there's some people where that really does become a very difficult part of their journey. I'm glad it wasn't part of yours, but I know I went to a very conservative school for college. I don't think it was as much a part of my overall upbringing as others, for sure. It wasn't like what you might call an independent fundamental Baptist church kind of environment, where a lot of people are just like, purity culture starts when you're really little and it's hammered home. It's almost like every other sermon. So I don't think I tasted the toxicity of it as quickly, but like when I went to Bob Jones University for a year in Greenville, South Carolina, I got this sense that a lot of the ladies there had gone through that. Mm-hmm. And of course, it wasn't even just like an option. Like there was a rule, you had to dress very modestly, or they would certainly, take care of that quickly and make sure you didn't do it again. But it was like this sense of like, you have to be so careful to not let your brothers stumble as a result of your dress or your demeanor, that, this has to be front and center as part of your spirituality. It's almost like part of your spiritual act of worship to God is to be mindful of the aura that you send out to the guys, especially.
Yes. I understood that when I hit my 20s and went back into the church system.
Okay. So it did it did get you, it just got you later. Well, I'm glad it didn't get you when you were younger.
I don't know. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I needed more protection actually during those years. So, but for me, I guess to kind of connect it, I went a little wild and went through a lot of pain and hurt in that process. And, like I said, because of really not knowing how to establish healthy boundaries, I was in a lot of really unhealthy, toxic situations, and even looking back over my life, I literally stand in awe sometimes of things I was protected through, because it could have been a lot worse. I mean, I started sneaking out of my house at age 11 and didn't get caught for the first time until I was 15. I mean, that's
You must have been good at it.
I was extremely good at it. I mean, we would move into a new house and I would scope out what was the best bedroom for me to have. I mean, I was crafty. I was like that. Wow. Yeah. But I think there was always a part of me that kind of had that. I knew how to protect myself, and it could have just been because of the environment that I was in, because like I always kind of say, my parents and I grew up together. I think there was like this primal, innate part of me that was just like, we're in survival mode. So I'm learning these skills, and I know how to.
It's kind of funny, but that sounds kind of sad and rough too, to be in survival mode for so long.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
That definitely rings a bell. Survival mode. What was you mentioned some of the toxic parts before you go into the purity culture side of things? What were some of the hardships you went through, if you don't mind my asking?
Not at all. So my first experiences were when I was 11. It was that summer transition from 11 to 12. And I had an older cousin who stayed with us, who kind of like really helped me learn the ropes, so to speak. Had my first experiences with alcohol and cigarettes. And I hung out with a crowd that was like my age all the way up to 20, and we were all, like skateboarders and punks and heavy metal. And, we all hung out at like the same park where, the guys would go skateboarding and, you just kind of learn who would buy you alcohol. We'd hang out in the woods and drink. Like that was my early teen years, and kind of set the set the foundation for the next decade of, that part of my life. And I got a lot of attention from guys because of how I looked. And my first sexual experience was non-consensual. I was very young. It was during a time I had snuck out of my house. I snuck out alone because my cousin had ran away from her home, and we got a call. My family had gotten a call that evening, and I remember my mom asking where my cousin was, and I hadn't heard from her. So I was like, okay, when lights go down, I'm going to go look for her. And that was why I snuck out. I wanted to go find out if she was in the area anywhere, certainly. And we didn't have cell phones then, so there was no text message to know where she was at.
Like in the dark ages.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to the area where we hung out, and all the guys were out. So I was the only girl with my dog. I was wise enough to take my dog with me for two reasons. He'd protect me, even though he was little, he'd bark. But then he wouldn't bark when I came back in the house, so no one would wake up. So the dog would come with me. And yeah, no, it was a really bad mix of alcohol, older guys, and one of them taking me for a walk to go help find my cousin. And it didn't end well, let's just say that. And I think to kind of like put in, there was that part of me that was intrigued, because I'm getting this attention from an older guy. And then there was that part of me that did have that core of like, oh no, I need to wait to do this with, when I'm older, with someone I love. And I had actually been lying about my age. I was telling everybody I was like 13 instead of 11, and I could get away with it. Not that that was any better in the situation. Yeah. So anyway, I had lost my virginity unwillingly, completely. Like I had clearly drew a line that he went across, but it was not violent, if that makes any sense. So I definitely went through the experience of, as a woman, like I brought this on to myself, I was in a bad situation. So I definitely had that mindset, and I didn't tell a lot of people about it for almost a year. And it really had a bad effect on me. Interestingly, my parents had taken me out of the school that I was in during that time because I had actually skipped like the first 2 months of 7th grade. After this happened, I started smoking pot every morning before school. My parents found out I was skipping school, so they put me into another school district, which was better. It stopped, I wasn't skipping school anymore. But I got really, really depressed. And I still gravitated toward, the crowd that I felt like I could fit in with, because of my life, like, the stable, the stable kids from stable families. And I didn't really align too well, although I did have one good friend during those years that did give me that experience. But she was also kind of like, in her little dark stage. We connected because we both loved heavy metal and, but yeah, so that experience, I really struggled quite a bit with. And I think because of that experience and how I felt, I had really unhealthy relationships through my adolescence, because I had that subconscious belief that I think it was a mix of both being attracted, but also believing you couldn't have something better, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
I'm just curious, and I'm number one, I'm sorry for that experience. I appreciate you sharing it so openly. You kind of touched on this for a second, but the whole idea of you had kind of brought it upon yourself. Were you able to talk through that with anybody at that time, just to kind of make it clear in your young mind that this was not, appropriate behavior from the man? And just that, that no matter how a girl dresses or whatever, that especially, if in the context you describe, which is there's a lot of other factors that are like, you just, every guy that's going to be a good guy is going to be very, very responsible. It sounds like a lot of manipulation could have occurred in those contexts. But did you have anyone that kind of walked through with you the whole sense of you were just that you had the worth for someone to have respected you, and obviously that line was crossed, and that they took advantage of you? And then I guess just a follow up, I'm just curious, was that something that ended up becoming like a criminal case, or how did that pan out?
Yeah. Yes, I did, thankfully, the school psychologist, and of course my parents. And it didn't until I came out fully with it that I was met with that compassion, which was really, really good. And I think that was helpful, but what I was going through internally in my psyche, I mean, I don't think anything outside of me completely, I mean, it definitely was an inner journey that I had to walk through. And yes, there was an attempt to take legal action, and what had to happen, we had to do a phone call that was recorded that would get him to admit what happened, but he didn't really do it. He kind of did this, well, I didn't mean to hurt you, or, I'm really sorry for everything that had happened. Like, it was nothing, they didn't have enough to really even do anything about it. And I think it might have been, I don't even really remember the length of time. It was like a couple of years after. And there were some things that happened that I think affected any legal action from taking place. Like, I had a friend who confronted him at his job and like kind of gave him a warning about what he had done. So I think that might have affected that legal aspect of things. So, and I think where I was at, it was just like, that's all I'm going to do. Like, this is what came of it. We just need to move on from this. Interestingly, though, he was the son of a pastor, which I don't think I had realized when everything had happened, but I came into that knowledge later. So it's just an interesting piece of information,
Very telling. Growing up in the church doesn't save you from that kind of mentality. No. It's just a quick side note. It's really surprising to you, not just the issue of whether or not a pastor's son would have sex before marriage, but just the whole idea of like what, without knowing the person, obviously, and just making this comment kind of in the dark, but like what kind of pastor would not take the time to teach his son to be extremely respectful to a woman's autonomy, to her, to her body. I mean, like I love how I've got, 2 little girls. I've got 4 kids, but 2 of them are girls. And our older one, I get to talk to her sometimes about it and say, you get to decide. I'll ask them at night, hey, everybody, we're going to sing a song. We're going to do a little story time. We're going to have, end the night with some happy thoughts. And then I say, hey, does anybody want to hug goodnight? And usually the answer is yes. But, if the answer is ever like a no, I'm like, I try to use it as a teaching time. Like, just so you'd always have that freedom, Abby. You can tell someone, I need space for my body. Like, it's a no. And I think it's so important. And it makes me just wonder, why would a pastor of a church not instill in his son just the manliness, even, I mean, I'm bringing in the Christian side of it, but even from a non-Christian side, it's important. But from a Christian side, like, why wouldn't you want to teach your son to be a man of honor, which to me starts with, no means no, and it's really, really shocking. But side note, but it's interesting to hear that.
Yeah, and this was 1987 too. So I don't even think like the consciousness was fully at that place. I don't even know in or out of the church, I mean, it was, and I know my church experiences during that time definitely dwindled during my adolescence. We pretty much went as a family, the Creasters, right? Christmas, Easter Christians we became. And or if things were really, really bad, we'd go, and every time it was pretty much a hellfire and brimstone message. So it was like nothing that I could connect with my life. It was a lot of fear. It was a lot of, very emotional, very, make sure you're not taking the mark of the beast. I mean, that was a huge theme during the late 80s, early
So
90s. So
left behind kind of stuff.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question about your rough experience? A lot of people, I think, struggle with the idea of the emphasis on virginity being this gift that you have, that you give to your future spouse, and that if you've lost it, for sure, if you've lost it voluntarily, but even if you've lost it involuntarily, you're kind of damaged goods, and you kind of aren't worth as much, if you could call it that, in the marketplace of the women who are, possible wives for these, men. They're looking for a woman that, because you are, so to speak, not as pure, that therefore you're not as good of a choice. Did that message come through to you, or did they not connect it for you that way?
I don't know that I don't think that I directly heard that message during those years.
Okay.
But I definitely know on a cellular subconscious level, I felt it, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think I even really needed that message. I think my being just felt it, and I think I acted out with drugs and alcohol during those years because I felt that defilement. So the loss of my dreams, and I definitely know with the overlay of feminism during those years, there was like this part of, and even my family dynamics, kind of the sense of like, I need to be the one that goes to college. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to meet someone. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a career. Then I'm going to have a family. Like, even though I was being completely reckless underneath all of that, that was the outcome I was hoping to achieve.
Right.
But I didn't know how to break out of the cycle I was in to get to that place. So I just spent my adolescence pretty much cycling, through this. I think I messed around with a lot of guys from like 12 to 14. And then when I was 14, I met someone much older than me and went into like a 2-year relationship with this person. It was a really quick attachment, and it was basically a sexually abusive relationship for 2 years. It was literally like going through a date rape experience. Like, you go to the bar and they place a a drug in your drink so they can sleep with you, like, for 2 years. Because I lost all my inhibitions when I drank, and this person knew that and would basically take advantage of that. And he outwardly was very charming with my family. So there was a little bit of that predatory grooming aspect to that relationship. And I totally believe because of that my parents didn't have boundaries between each other in their relationship. They couldn't even protect themselves in their relationship. How could they fully protect their children? So it was just a lot of dysfunction. And I think a lot of like wherewithal within myself of like, I'm going to get out of this, some way, shape, or form. So I was in that relationship for 2 years and finally was like, I'm out of here, get away from me. We moved away from the house we were living in, like just a few blocks away. But that was like, but I wasn't going to counseling or anything. I was in my group of friends, and within 4 months, I was, in my next relationship with my daughter's father, which was much better in the realm of intimacy. Was, like, my boundaries were never crossed, thankfully. Like, that was not an unhealthy aspect of our relationship, but everything outside of it was. So there was like anger issues and drug issues and all of that. A lot of conflict, a lot of verbal conflict back and forth between he and I.
Can I just comment? It sounds like you have a very strong internal bounce back mechanism. Like, some people, I think, that would have gone through what you did would have probably spiraled a little bit deeper and stayed there. They kind of would have gone to the bottom of the barrel and licked the splinters for a while. It sounds like you kind of have this like a hope that things are going to get better, and a sense of there's a better future ahead of you. I don't know if that's reading too much into your story, but it sounds like it. If it is, that's pretty admirable, because I know some people where they experience something, and 20 years later, it's like a dark cloud that never goes away. And I'm not trying to discount that. There's some horrible stuff that really does take a long time to go through.
Yeah.
But at the same point, you want to at some point have a sense of like, I am reclaiming some sense of power over my own life, my own mind. And if people took advantage of me and hurt me, I need to go through some significant healing, and depression may be a part of that. But that there is a future that I will try to start to control, and I will see myself as more valuable than other people did. Even if no one ever says it to me, I will say it to myself, I am more valuable, and I'm not going to let people that try to, put a rain cloud over my head, I'm not going to let them keep it there. I'm going to push it away. I'm going to push the sunshine in. And it sounds like you have a sense of like, that was something you had somewhat of an ability to do from an early age. I'm just picking up on some of this, but it sounds like you bounced back pretty quickly on some of this. Not that you took it lightly, but that you didn't let it kill you.
No, no, but yeah, no, not at that time. No, I didn't. And getting pregnant with my daughter at 18 was a huge wake up call for me too, I think. That really was just like, woo, I in many ways say she probably saved my life, but I don't really know, I mean, I don't know what my life would have been had I not had her, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Like, that's what unfolded, and she's a beautiful being,
Yeah.
And so this is probably where our theology part will kind of come in, because during this time period that I encountered Christ, and it deeply and profoundly affected me. And it wasn't right away. It wasn't until my daughter was almost 2. And so her dad and I were pretty much like an on again, off again, relationship. That whole experience. So like I was navigating through that experience, and took a break. So I started college when I was pregnant with my daughter. I actually got pregnant with her while I was in college. I had already graduated. Thankfully, I had gone to nursing school while I was in high school at a tech school. So that was really, that was a very grace-filled experience, because that helped us live. So, and, there was still that drive within me of like, okay, I'm still going to pursue my dreams. I wanted to actually become a social worker or a midwife. That was the direction I wanted to go into. And so her dad and I were together. We were living at his parents' house in the basement, literally. So I had my pit experience.
I'm sorry.
And I had an aunt who was a single mom who was continually witnessing to me, because this was, the dynamic of my family. And she had come out of an abusive relationship with the father of her children, and she would just continually be telling me about the Lord's love. And I remember getting these thoughts of like, this must be why God wants you to wait until you're married to have sex, because this is a really painful life. Like this was starting to come out of my psyche, and I'd be like, I should move back home. I need to go back to college. I need to get out of this. I need to start going to church again. Like, that's exactly what was happening within me. I started really exploring spirituality, the new age. I was going to counseling, all of that stuff, all those steps were happening in my life. And so anyway, the day actually came where I was going to make this decision. And I decided to talk to my daughter's father about it, and a really interesting experience happened. So I had it like all planned, and he was a mechanic at the time, really punching, punch holes in the wall kind of a guy. And he came home from work and had told me he had to talk to me. And I was like, okay, well, I need to talk to you. You go first, kind of a thing. So then he proceeds to tell me that he got into a fight with his boss at work that day. And this man had come in to have his oil changed. And this man happened to be an ex-drug dealer. his father left at a really young age. So there was just like things that my daughter's father could relate to. This man ends up praying with him. Apparently, my ex feels the Holy Spirit and gives his life to Christ. Then this man proceeds to invite us to church, which happens to be the Assembly of God church that I grew up in. So I'm like, oh, what's happening? That's literally how I'm, having this experience. And so I was like, well, I was going to leave you, move back home and start going to church. But maybe this is what's happening. This is the answer. Maybe I'm not supposed to leave. We're supposed to go to church. So that's what we did. And it was a new pastor, interestingly, whose name was Tim, by the way, and had blonde hair and blue eyes. I kid you not.
I promise it wasn't me.
I know it wasn't you. But he was very gentle. He was not the Hellfire and Brimstone pastor, Damiani, who had passed away a few years ago, and I hadn't been in church in many years. So he was very compassionate, very loving. Did the altar call thing that Sunday, raised the hand. So we go up and we start counseling with the pastor. So that's the path we're on. And basically, they have no training in domestic abuse. They have no training in addiction. They have training in get right with the Lord, get married, and give your lives to God. That's what their training is. That's what they tell you to do, and it was pretty much, he counseled us to a degree for a few months. I think he had his like compassion and his grace, but he was basically like, you guys got to get right with the Lord. You need to get married. You're living in sin. Or you need to part ways and still give your lives to the Lord. You need to acknowledge that this was sin. Like, it was very straightforward. It was, this was sin.
Can I ask you, do you still believe that sin is a real thing?
Very much different mindset.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. That will take us into another.
Yeah, well, I'll put that on pause and go on with your story. We'll circle back to that in a few minutes.
Yeah. So long story short, we went through a few months. In this cycle, we both believed that marriage was just a piece of paper. Like, we were both in agreement on that. And he was having like Navy recruiter people coming to him often. So he was trying to make a decision about going into the military. And we were talking about marriage, but I definitely think there was a part of us that didn't want to, I think we wanted to make a conscious decision about it, and what I was experiencing okay, so actually to kind of fast forward, it was in this period that I actually had my personal encounter with Christ. And that came after a few months of my ex and I going through this. We landed at my parents' house because of family dynamics. And I got to a point where I was completely disgusted with my life. Literally, I was just like, I can't do any of this anymore. You need to leave.
That was a pretty good sound effect. You should record those sound effects for like a video or something.
I could do voiceover.
Yeah.
No, I could relive it. Literally, I was just like, you need to go. So I broke up with him. He went through his whole experience with that. He moves back home, and it was in that very distinct time period of us being apart. I'm at home with my parents and my daughter. I have an argument with my dad one evening about Christianity, because my dad was going through his own experience, kind of cycling back with his relationship with God. And I was literally in my kitchen, like, they're all just a bunch of hypocrites. Like, I can't deal with this. And there was even a part of me, like, I didn't even know if I was going to stay in the church. I didn't know what I was going to really do here. I had put my daughter to bed. I remember my dad and I kind of agreeing to disagree. And I put on TBN and I tell God, I want to listen to what these people have to say. And I start telling God all sorts of things about what I think about them. And I literally had my own personal divine encounter. I mean, it was direct communication. There was no, it was a pretty intense experience, where I describe it as like, you're going to school trying to learn a concept, and that light bulb feeling goes off, like it just clicks. It was like that amplified 1,000 times. And basically the Lord said to me, don't look at these people. Don't look at the people around you. Look to my son, Jesus Christ, because that's who I sent to die on the cross for your sins. I mean, it was so, like, I've heard this message 1,000 times in my life, but it was like, you're talking to me. But the interesting thing is that it wasn't coming through as hellfire and brimstone and condemnation. It was literally like this most intense, unconditional love that I had never felt in my whole entire life. So I was just like, and I always say it was like finding, like you thought your lover was dead at sea and you suddenly encounter like, oh my gosh, they're alive. I mean, it was literally, I'm leaving a lot out, but this is what the experience was like. It was just like, this is what I've been hungering for and thirsting for like my whole life, this love. And I did. I totally surrendered, weeping. Everything on the television that night met me where I was at. It was all something that I was searching out, something I had experienced. Jesse Duplantis was on there. He's a crazy televangelist, like these crazy people. And I completely surrendered to this experience, completely. I started reading the Bible. Everything became illuminated to me. I mean, things I didn't understand before. So I definitely had what they talk about. Like, I didn't speak in tongues though. So that's a whole nother story. I didn't have an experience in church doctrine, if you could. Like, I kind of look back wondering if I had just had that experience and never went through the church system, I wonder what my life might have turned out to be. But that's not what happened. I went right into the church system because that's what I was taught, and I felt guided to. Like, I wasn't having anything in that spiritual experience telling me not to. And the first few years were very healing for me. And yes, this was Joshua Harris season. So he was the pioneer of purity culture in, the late 90s, early 2000s. And for me, coming out of what I was in, this was literally my living water. Like, I was like,
Well, can I back up a little bit? Because I definitely don't want this to be a debate, but I do want to ask some questions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Number one, how did you know it was God speaking to you and not just your desire to feel differently about your life and about your future? How did you know for sure that it was God?
I think because of how powerfully it hit me. Now, I will say where I stand now, and then I do wonder if I was having a very powerful natural DMT experience. I don't negate that. Okay. So it's going to be interesting for you and I to talk now, because you're catching me 20 years later with a whole nother dynamic of experiences. But I can't prove anything, honestly. Like, even looking back, that's what it was for me. It was straight up God talking to me, not audibly, but in my spirit. It felt very much outside of me. It didn't feel like me talking to me, if that makes sense. Yeah. It was a masculine energy. It was a...
Well, just a few quick questions. And again, we said this before we hit the record button, but if any questions that I ask you don't feel comfortable, this is not to attack your journey or your story. But I do want to understand, because a lot of my channel is geared toward people understanding that Christianity is mythology, and that it's not real. And that it's the story, even not just of the mythology part of it, but just the whole story of how the Bible came to be created. A lot of the information isn't readily available to a lot of people. It isn't talked about. It's distorted by apologists profusely, who are very, very sneaky, to go back to the sneaky concept, very, very much charlatans in what they do. And my goal is to expose the apologists and to help people understand Christianity is not real. Yep. So my first question about this, and I do want to get back to some of the topics about sexuality, because there's a lot there. Yes. But just since we're talking about a vision, there are other people from other religions who would say the same exact thing. They would just switch the name. I had a profound vision from Krishna. I had a profound vision from Allah. I had a profound vision from whatever, Krishna, Vishnu. I'm sure back in the day, a long time ago, people had a profound vision of Zeus or Apollo. Yeah. And what did you do at that time? Or maybe it's just more of a question for current day, but what did you do to differentiate that from other people that would say, well, I had a vision too, and my vision said that Jesus is not real, that my, this person is the real God. But then I guess maybe a follow-up question, you can answer these in whichever order you want, but I'd love to hear just your impression of Christianity, because the Bible does say that Jesus is God. Jesus says, I am the Father of one. Whether some of that was added later by the church, but in the canon we have, it says, I am the Father of one. It says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So when you think that Jesus is God, he's divine, which is what the Protestant story is, then when you look back at the Old Testament and you see Yahweh doing stuff, that is technically Jesus. They're one, they're the same. Before Abraham was, I am. So he is one and the same with Yahweh. And in the Old Testament, Yahweh did some pretty nasty stuff, which I'm sure you're very aware of.
Oh yeah.
So this whole, I really struggle. This is my part of the question. I'll try to keep this short because I know I get wordy, but this whole concept of I just feel the love, and we get it. We especially I got sucked in at the end of my Christian journey to the whole the whole Bethel music, the Hillsong experience. I just feel the love. It's almost like it's oozing, like it's syrup. And you get very, sacerdotal, very, it's almost like it's an invertebrate theology. There's nothing to it. It's just, I just want to feel good about myself and about the world, and this sense of God's going to make everything better.
Yeah.
But you look at the actual Bible, and you're like, well, if the gospel is, and some people in their presentation is, God loves you and he has a wonderful plan for your life. Well, what was he doing for all the people that he drowned in Noah's flood? I mean, I know that that's not actual history. It didn't happen. But if it had happened, if it were real, he drowned kids. He drowned a bunch of people. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. The next verse, they go in and they slaughter everybody. And in some of the cases, they're allowed to keep the young girls that are virgins for themselves. We're talking about genocide. We're talking about slavery. We're talking about land theft. We're talking about kidnapping, child brides, or worse. We're talking about genital mutilation. We're talking about stoning. So the whole Jesus, I just feel his love. It's hard for me to put all that together. And I'm just curious, did you put any of those contrasting issues together at that time, or was that a much later part?
It was a much later. It took years, actually. The first 7 years of my experience in this was, the focus was so much on healing that I think it probably took me maybe at least a good 4 years before I even was in that place of safety to start deeply asking all of everything that you brought up. And I was in a, so we had my ex, to fast forward quickly, what had happened, I have this experience. He goes into the military, he starts going to church, he asks me to marry him, we go get married, and now we're on the West Coast in Washington.
Okay.
So that's
a lot of change quick.
Yeah, that all happens after this experience. And I'm woo, and he's not moving so fast with the spiritual journey. My ex and I, we were on very different pages with this. But I had found a very small Assembly of God church where we were living out in Oak Harbor, Washington, which was nothing like what I grew up in. I mean, it was, it had issues that arose during the time that I was there, as every church goes through, interestingly, around some of the sexuality issues. But we had pastors come in that had a wonderful marriage, great youth ministry. I mean, really, it was a very, very good experience, even with the purity culture in it. We did have a little bit of our, we all burned our CDs, burned the things in the fire aspect. But overall, it was a very balanced, loving community. But, looking back, there were definitely issues, but there was respect. There were, when issues came up, people worked through them. You know what I mean? So that was a good experience for me that I am very thankful for. I got faithful into the whole tithing and worship. I mean, I had ecstatic worship experiences. I mysticism to the hilt,
Oh, yeah.
They were orgasmic for me, literally. Like that was my experience with Christ. I haven't had experiences like that since then, and they sustained me for literally years on the path of celibacy. Like that's,
Yeah.
It's one of those things like you taste, you just can't go back to what.
Yeah. I think I know a little bit about that. I wouldn't say I was ever at that level, but I remember there was a lot of little things that just disappointments in life, in my young adult life, that when if you got me in the right context, like I'd go to, there's a church I went to in Atlanta called Perimeter Church, which is a Presbyterian church, but very seeker sensitive, very modern, not like an old stuffy Presbyterian church.
Right.
But they, very, very focused on, kind of like a Bethel music kind of environment.
Yep.
And you get the right music playing. I mean, I could get in tears because especially this sense of like, when you've been through some pain and you get this sense that God will restore the years the locust has eaten.
Yeah.
He will take your hardship and turn it into joy. It says in the Bible, you'll suffer for a little while and then he'll strengthen you and settle you, make you strong or something like that. Like you just get this sense that all this is building up to like the hinge on the door it was like the door was shut tight and all of a sudden you hear that squeaky hinge and it's starting to move open and you're like, yes, God is moving. He's finally opening the doors.
Yeah.
And you get the right music playing and oh my goodness, the tears can start gushing. Yeah. And not just, physical tears, but even just the emotional tears of like, oh God, thank you so much that you are doing such a deep work, and thank you that I can trust you even when it's dark.
Yeah. Oh, amen. Sorry, like you're taking me back.
Well, don't let me take you back because it was it was bullshit.
Okay, so the honeymoon period is starting to fade, and I'm going
Christianity.
Yeah. Well, no, the honeymoon period, like what we just talked about, the whole, okay, it's starting to, okay, we're settling into married life now. And I'm going, hold on. What they're saying in the pulpit, what I'm reading in the Old Testament, this isn't quite lining up with what I'm actually experiencing with you. Like, what's going on here? Like, what is this? You're bipolar, literally. I was like, you are bipolar in this word, like I had definitely had my season of seeing the Bible as a deeper, how could I put I wouldn't use the word metaphysical then because that was a very taboo word, but like my experience with the word there was a deeper meaning, there was a deeper spiritual meaning. I still have Strong's Concordance. I was there. Like I don't have a degree. I could, with all the study that I just did on my own. So anyway, that started really coming up for me. And interestingly, the Lord didn't immediately answer me. So here's kind of where I can answer something from how I felt at this stage, and then where I'm even still now in my relationship to all of this, because I don't feel like I'm on the other side yet. So if I were to answer, I can only answer still to this day, this is what I think he's doing. If I were to trust him, I think he's bringing me back to myself. I think he's being a being that's showing me everything and allowing me to develop discernment and to think for myself and to become free. I think this, but I don't really know this because I'm still navigating this experience and I still read what's been written, right? So, and I can't touch this being other than whatever comes into my physical reality or my spiritual senses feel. I have no way to prove any of this, right? In a concrete sort of a way. So I noticed on this journey too, almost every 7 years, I would kind of go through a cycle and a shift in a progression. And so when I got to this stage, I was there for a little bit. And like the doctrine of eternal torment was really like, I'm really having a hard time with this. Like I accepted this a few years ago and I understood God is love and you didn't actually create us for this. This is for the devil, right? But now I'm kind of like, there's all these other questions, like, because of what you're doing in the Old Testament and who is the devil and, all of this stuff. And there's a lot of indoctrination of do not go outside of the word of God because all of that's of the devil and it's a deception. Like, don't compare. But yet, when I was outside of church, I'm studying all the religions. And I didn't have any taboo. Like, Jesus was never like, don't do this. He was literally like a guide to me. I never put a pastor on a pedestal. Like, Jesus was my Lord, literally. He was my husband. He was showing up for me that way, like through jobs, through provision, through everything. So I had ended up being guided to move back to New York, and my parents were going through a divorce. I'm back in my father's house, so to speak. And I was going to a Calvary Chapel church. Now, I did the Assembly of God for a little bit, but I felt led to go to Calvary Chapel. They're a little more grounded, not as woo-woo, into the word. It was just, I was really in a study phase. And I remember the pastor talking about there were like, the book of Enoch was starting to come out, and he was like, that's all, the devil's just trying to deceive you, and I was just like, it wasn't resonating with me to hear this. I'm like, nah, something's off, And I remember coming home from church and asking the Lord, something doesn't feel right. You talk to me in other ways outside of the Bible. Like, why can't we read these books? And I literally opened up to the book of Jude, which makes a reference to Enoch. And then I was literally guided to the next scripture. I think it was like John 21:25. Don't quote me, I could be wrong, but it was like, and Jesus did so many other things that I suppose not even all the books in the world could contain all that he had done. And I was like, green light, I'm reading the book of Enoch, like Jesus was like, see, it's right there. Go ahead, go read. Like, that's like the relationship I was having with him. And so read I did in the book of Enoch and the Apocrypha. And then I was led into teachers, Bible-based teachers who believed in universal reconciliation. And I was like, this makes so much sense. This seems
meaning that eventually everyone would be saved.
Everyone will be saved. Not like the Unitarian Universalist. It still was very Christ-centered. Christ is the way, but like all things are going to eventually make its way around, which could probably answer your question. For me, I began to reconcile with all the other religions. Like, Christ appears as we receive according to our programming. Like, this being of love fills everything and is teaching everyone through all of these paradigms, because there's this, they all have a common thread. They all have a common message if you put them together. So I was really starting to reconcile that, and I was really starting to have peace with that. And I was really drawn to the Hebrew feasts. So then I went from universal reconciliation, held that, and then was led to a Messianic congregation that I was a part of for almost a decade, who did not believe in universal reconciliation, but I really felt that I was there to get back to the Hebrew roots. So a lot less ecstatic stuff during these years, a lot more quieter, deeper study, which then eventually led me to my deconstruction process in 2014. So, yeah.
So just before you go through that, and it sounds like there's probably a lot of meat to unpack there. At this point, just for into two parts, your story and then your internal stuff. You're at this point, you're back in New York. You're not married anymore at this point, right? Okay.
No. Yeah.
And so you had gone to a Calvary Chapel church for a little bit, which was a little bit less fun, or a little bit less charismatic, probably. Right. But a little bit, but much more charismatic than a fundamental Baptist church probably would have been.
Right.
So then you go to a Messianic church that isn't universalist, but you just pick up what you can from them. At this point, though, as you're through those last two parts, the last two churches you were in before 2014, did you feel like you actually had a relationship with God, and did you feel like you were understanding where this, like, what this book really was? Like, did you have a sense of, I know what's in it, and I know where it came from, and it's real? Or was it more experiential? Like, I know a lot of your your stories about experience. Like, how did you fit those pieces together? And I guess maybe even a better question would be, did you feel, up until the 2014 timeframe, did you feel at all compelled to dive deeper into where it came from, or some of the, even the philosophical implications of some of its teachings, like blood magic, or just how comfortable, how many questions were you asking up to that point?
At that point, none of those. That actually started coming the past few years in my deconstruction process. So at that point, I definitely was not there yet. And interestingly, what was experientially happening for me was I felt like I was in a womb. I was in the mother's womb. And if I didn't get out, I was going to be a stillborn dead baby. Like, it was, the walls were caving in on me, literally. Like, you know, like.
So you wouldn't have called it like peace from God per se that was happening?
It was like, let's get out of here.
Out of Christianity, or just out of a particular church?
Out of the church system, definitely out of the church system. There was a few experiences that started happening that I was seeing, like just some unhealthy dynamics relationally, that I was like, this is not good. Don't want this, you know. And two experiences that I had within, for me personally, that were like, okay, it's really time to go now, was just that I was at, you know, just one, I don't even remember what the sermon was, but I just remember sitting and literally looking at the walls, telling you what I just said, like, I'm going to die here if I don't get out. Like, I just feel so suffocated in this environment. And then and then
kudos to you for admitting that, though. It's good.
Yeah. And then I visited a church with some friends, a prophetic church, and it was some, you know, revival teacher, and they had this big wooden staff that the pastor wanted everybody to like go and touch the staff. And I'm like, I ain't touching that thing. Like, I just had this, like, I'm sitting back with all the crazy, like, I'm so done with all you crazies. Like, that's how I felt. Yeah. And then I did feel that audible, you know, the Lord was like, they are waiting for revival. It was very clear, that very clear, distinct communication to my spirit, the masculine voice saying, they're sitting here waiting for revival. They believe I'm just going to fill the churches. He's like, you are the revival. I'm taking you out. I'm taking you where they won't go. And we left. Like, that's what happened. And I left, and I didn't go back. Can
I ask you, you mentioned the masculine voice a few times. Did that ever, I know we're talking about, you know, pre-2014 timeframe, but did that ever become disturbing to you, that you had been basically taught about a God who was masculine, who was certainly choosing men to lead his church, choosing men to, usually, I think like 98% of the time, to be the recipients of his visions and scriptures, to write down for the canon. You know, men who were basically supposed to, according to the Bible, be the leaders of the church, the leaders of their family. This biblical structure, you know, is that, you know, God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man, man's the head of woman, and so forth. Just the sense that there was a patriarchy, both a human and a divine patriarchy. Did that feel either uncomfortable or threatening, or was that an okay concept up to that point?
Actually, overall, it was okay and safe. But I will say this, 2 years, I remember it was 2012. I remember being on a walk one day and actually having a very weird experience with this masculine energy. And even till this day, I don't fully have an answer to it, but I kind of did get one many years later. And it felt like a devouring energy. It felt like and I remember it almost like filtering through me, and almost like it was being shown to me how this was affecting my daughter. And I was just like, oh, what is, like, it felt so like, what on earth is this? And interestingly, this was recently, I think even in the past year, I saw an imagery, I think it was of Kronos, it was basically the god that was like eating his son. Okay. I'd have to go back and look at the story, but I was like, ooh, that is almost like what that energy, that one time I was feeling, like this very devouring energy. So there's so many, and being that I am mystical and medical, and I can go there in my brain, you know, I could take a positive twist on that and say, well, maybe I was having that experience to show me that this that paradigm I was in is being eaten up. It's being, and it maybe even exposed, right? Like it was kind of like, this is actually, this looks like love, but this is actually a very wounded masculine energy, which is kind of more what I'm navigating now is kind of like trying to understand. So what I feel is it's almost like humanity projecting this story outward. And what we're seeing from the beginning to the end is kind of like, there's so much talk about, toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, and perhaps it's our story of like coming, like evolving really. And over the years, this isn't kind of, it's kind of like I've reconciled like the old and the new, the veil, like all the bridal metaphors. The consciousness of man was very darkened during that period. So they were creating outward rituals to help them understand, what was happening inside of them. Interestingly now, what I feel like I'm stepping into is like, whoa, because I'm just learning this and I'm just starting to experience the other side of it now, the feminine side. And I'm actually, and to kind of connect it with sacred sexuality, I'm going, it seems that for some reason, men have created this story, or the masculine has really created a story of sacrifice, of war and of sacrifice and blood. And if you kind of just took, like, if you removed all of that for a moment and you just took nature, you just took men and women. So probably maybe close to a year ago, I was focusing on the, menstruation within women. And I saw a picture of actually a ram's uterus. And I was like, okay, it sheds blood. You had to sacrifice a ram, And I started making these connections of, wait, it's the womb. The woman actually literally sheds blood once a month, 5 to 7 days, which are very biblical numbers, right? 7 days. And it really started hitting me. And we birth children, right? So the scripture says, and women shall save through childbearing, which has been a hugely distorted scripture. But what I've been stepping into is going, wow, wait a minute here. I actually see something really beautiful that could be in all of this that I would say this is why I have a pause in my coaching right now, because I'm literally processing what I'm sharing with you right now. I can't be a teacher on this. I can't, you know what I mean? I'm kind of like taking my whole experience and now taking in some new information of what I'm seeing. And I'm like, ooh, this is really profound and beautiful and dynamic. So no, I don't agree with circumcision. I think it's just as wrong as female, genital mutilation. I definitely understand the concept. I know what they were trying to drive home with that, with, removal of the flesh, the carnal mind, being more spiritual minded, so on and so forth. But no, you don't need to. That's nature has given you are very capable of teaching your sons how to clean their penis. Can I be that? We're not. We live in America today, and I'm sorry if you feel it's too much energy for you to take the time to teach your son how to clean their penis. Like, that's really at the root of this. And then the woman is so priestly, it blows our mind. Okay, so the male is the high priest, he is the giver of life. There's the study of the sperm and the egg coming together. I don't know if you've heard it. There's like a spark of light they found that happens when, the two, you should look it up. It's really interesting. But literally, I just see this picture of the masculine playing a role, the feminine playing the role. Jesus's crucifixion, this is going to be so heretical for me to even say, is literally like female appropriation of the menstrual cycle, because the blood is shed every month, and women have been cast out and made dirty in the Old Testament. It wasn't seen as something clean, it was seen as something unclean. But blood is shedding and blood is cleansing, and a man very much can come in humility to the feminine during that time and get in touch with his feminine side, get in touch with service, get in touch with having a resting place. And for some reason, it's so primal and so old and thousands of years old, we have created a very damaging story. I personally think a very, very damaging story of man having to fight, having to sacrifice, having to atone, instead of us just learning to take personal responsibility. Like we can literally have beautiful rituals just with our bodies. We don't actually have to kill animals. We don't have to sacrifice humans. You can literally work with blood in a very healthy way. The body's already doing it. Like nature's literally giving it to you. And
well, I just want to take a quick pause. I definitely, I respect where you're at. I definitely take a very different perspective, as you know.
oh yeah.
The whole energy thing, I don't trust the concept that energy is speaking to me. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I don't trust any kind of sense of there's energy that's guiding me. I don't think anybody's guiding me. I don't think there's any energy guiding me. There's certainly energy in the universe, but it's not consciously, there's no consciousness to it. It's not like something is speaking to me or trying to get me to learn something. I guess I would just ask, how much do you trust the guidance that you're getting, and how do you put that in perspective of, there's so many people that would feel like they're getting energy or guidance or just messages from a divine source that's taking them a different direction. And I guess I'm really struggling with trying to figure out how do you mix where you're at with just the fact of what we talked about earlier with what the Bible teaches. Like there's people that I guess you might call them more progressive Christians who would say, they might even say it directly to me like this. They'd say, you know what, Tim, we understand why you deconverted from Christianity, but part of the problem is you were taught a literalist perspective. You were taught, that there's literally sins and there's a literal hell. Everything is literal. Everything happened. Noah's flood was literal. Everything was real. And they're like, you know what? There's parables in the Bible. Maybe God did take, 1 billion years to make the earth. Maybe Genesis 1:1 is not literally 6 days. And that if you just take it, much more symbolically, it kind of becomes okay. And I can see a little bit of their perspective, but the problem is the book still says things like, if your son disobeys you enough, go take him before the village elders and stone him to death. It still does say, circumcision was God's message. I guess maybe a good way to summarize my question is, do you connect what you feel like is your version of spirituality, so to speak? Do you connect that with the Bible, or do you feel like it's separating from the Bible? Or do you feel like, the Bible describes God as Yahweh with a son named Jesus, and there's a Holy Spirit involved. Do you feel like when you feel like you're guided, that you're referring to like the biblical God character, or do you feel like it's different, or just how is that evolving?
Yeah, we're going through a divorce. Very.
Okay.
If I were to be straight up, that's where we're at. If I were to put it in human terms, and
are you okay with that?
I'm sorry, see that?
Are you okay with that? Like, does that scare you?
I'm much more now. So even like, it's interesting how much time it's taken for us to meet. Like 6 months ago, I was still in that phase, but I was like, I don't know if it's safe to go there fully,
Yeah.
So I believe that it is. And the Bible is I can't erase it from my journey, right? Like I can't, it's here, it exists. There's part of me that wants to take those scriptures, like you mentioned, and be like, let's just all have a fire. Let's just write them down and throw them in the fire. Like, let's just, because where I stand on that now, it's like coming out of an abusive relationship, right? Like when you're in it, you have all this stuff you're sifting through, but when you start coming out of it, it's like, no, like you said, like you need, and let's call a spade, right? Like we can, right? I agree with you actually 100%. Like we can take this in all these directions, right? All these different viewpoints, but at the end of the day, this is what it actually says. And are we holding so hard to our ancestors who were evolving, right? Who didn't have all these thousands of years later experiences? You know, it's interesting because it's like, I even look at that now, like, yes, we respect where we came from. If we're growing more and more in love, we're not going to become more abusive, right? Or we're not going to like even do to them what they did to us, so to speak. But you still need to be like, this is what it says. And are we going to keep holding on to, I'm like, these people are literally dead. No matter what you believe, their bodies are in the grave, gone. They have no power here.
Yeah. Well, can I take this to an extreme? And this is not at all to say that I hope this is where you end up. This is just a theoretical, but what if it really is all just pretend? What if it's all just mythology? Like, what if the debates that a church would have over their stances or our journeys, what if our journeys with Jesus are pretty much equivalent to someone else's journey with Zeus, thousands of years ago, someone else's journey with Krishna, someone else's journey with, a long time ago with Ra, sun god, and all the other earlier gods. What if it's just not real? Like, what if it's just truly a story? Now, not to say that it's not a story that had some interesting parable senses of like there's a life lesson that they were trying to teach people. They were trying to teach their children something about their culture. So it's not like you could say, well, it's of no value, I don't even want to hear about the Bible anymore.
Right.
It's part of our history. And certainly as I dive into it more, it's interesting to see even how it evolved. Like, for example, you mentioned Enoch. And yes, it's mentioned in Jude, but it's quoted like 100 times in the New Testament. That most Christians don't know that. And I'm working a presentation to talk about it, but like it's not just in Jude. People talk all the time. I was quoted twice in Jude and probably once more in one of the Peters, but it's quoted like 100 times elsewhere. But Christians don't want to go there, so they just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. But there's so much more to it even than that. Quotes I'm learning from Book of Jubilees, quotes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, what's Jesus doing quoting the Qumran community rule book? What's he doing quoting the Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice in the Qumran? Like, why are these people quoting all this stuff, and why don't they tell us? Why don't they tell us these things? Why don't they tell us Homer is woven into Luke and Acts like dramatically over and over? Why don't they tell us Luke Acts is a rewrite of the Iliad and the Odyssey? They don't tell us this stuff, but like, what if as you learn whatever path you take, and whether it's more philosophical or more just about taking a college class about the facts, like what if all of this stuff leads people to a spot where they say, you know what, none of this has ever been real. Like, this is not, there's no God, or at least there's no Yahweh. If there's a God, then I need to look elsewhere, but the Yahweh character is just made up. And he really was, because you look at it and you think, originally it was El or Elion, and he had a wife named Asherah, and he had many sons, one of whom was Yahweh. And eventually it switched, and Yahweh becomes the primary God, and he has Asherah as his wife. And then eventually Asherah dies out, and it's just Yahweh. So it literally evolved. The whole story keeps on changing. And so, like, I really struggle with taking the concept of taking previous generations' primitive versions of spirituality, which were very, very violent, very psychopathic. I think you mentioned a similar word, or I think you mentioned psychotic or psychopathic. But this whole idea of like God loves you, but if you don't obey Him, He's going to destroy you, which was not just for Israel, it's for even us. Was if I love you so much through Jesus, but if you don't love me back through Jesus, I'm going to burn you in hell. Which I know some liberal Christians would take differently, but like earlier people were struggling to figure out how to explain a lot of stuff. They didn't understand, even things like the stars above them, the cycles of why are there seasons? Why is this happening? Why are the volcanoes? Why are kids dying? Why are there floods? And they're doing their best. They're trying to figure out, are there forces at work behind these weird natural phenomena, and they come up with ideas, but they quickly learn that there's power. There's power in being able to dictate to people, this is the way God works, and if you listen to me and do what I say, you'll be fine. And the power structures that evolved, and then the redactive structures that said, we're going to shift the story, but we're going to shift it very carefully, and we're going to control the narratives, which we see it today, even in our politics. It's human nature. We're all doing it. No one's ever stopped it. But like, people want to control the narrative. People want to tell people what to believe. And like, we're talking about a religion that is based on blood magic and scapegoating, where it says blood can clean you and someone else can take your sins away. That's what this is all about. You need your sins taken away, and it's through blood. And if you cut it down to those, and you say, you know what? Number one, there is no sin, which I personally believe there are things we need to grow in. Obviously, we're making bad choices. I could make a bad choice today. It's not a sin because I'm not offending God with something, but yeah, I could make a bad choice, and I could eat the extra donut when I shouldn't, and I'll feel it in my when I get on the scale next week.
Yep,
But it's like, we all make bad choices, but if you don't have a sin issue, and there is no way, even if it were true that you had a sin issue, you can't transfer sins to the scapegoat, to the sacrificial lamb, to Jesus. And even if, I keep on saying even if you could, like, blood doesn't do anything. Jesus' blood doesn't do anything. It's just not real. It's like someone's described it to me as like, when they started pulling like the thread of the like the sweater, like thinking they're just pulling a little teeny thread.
Right.
And they're thinking they're just going to pull a little bit out and it's going to stop. But by the end, they're just like, there's no sweater left. And I guess I'm just curious, if you kept pulling at the sweater thread, and it unravels to a certain point, like, does that seem like a world that you would be okay with if you discovered that none of this is ever real? And just how do you process, like, it sounds like you're very much in an exploratory phase.
Right.
Do some of the potential outcomes feel threatening to you, or are you okay with that? And how do you deal with the unknowns?
Oh, wow.
It's a lot quick, I know.
It is. I'm trying to process all of that.
Answer it however you feel comfortable.
Give me just a couple seconds to take that in for a minute.
That's a deep question. I promise after that one, I want to wrap up by taking us back to your topics of sexuality with a few things like that. So
okay, and actually, I think everything we've talked about interconnects tremendously, because sex is how we got here. This is all rooted in sex, let me tell you.
Yeah.
It really
is.
So, okay. I would almost say, like, as I'm processing your question has probably been my process.
Is it an appropriate question to ask, though? I mean, does that feel like a threatening question that's kind of begging the question?
By feedback. So basically you're saying, like, if at the end of the day, what if I discovered it was all not true? Would that be like the best way to kind of break it down? Yeah, like if you just discovered this was pure mythology made up by some very bad men a long time ago and redacted and edited and involved by other very bad men. Right. And you didn't have all the books. You just, they picked which books and which versions of which books you got to read. And it's all man-made, literally man-made, as opposed to women-made. It's man-made by very bad men. And there's every reason on the table to just say, I'm done. This is not real. Is that outcome acceptable? I almost would have to say, I don't know if that is literally realistic in the sense, because it's so much a part of our history. It's so, you know what I mean? So I guess I could reconcile that and say, maybe we could come to that conclusion, but we're literally starting from scratch, and you still almost need it to understand where we've come from so we can move forward in a healthier way, right? So that would probably be the best way to go with that, because it to me, it just doesn't seem like it can just be erased. And then also there's the sense of like, we have a desire for justice, right? And we have, like, that's really in our DNA. And then it's like, how do we it's like there needs to be an integration of where we've come, science, like the prison systems we even have up right now are very barbaric, and yet and barbaric, what's the word I'm looking for? They're even predatory in the sense of being privately owned. Like, literally, our society makes money off of suffering. Our world makes money off of suffering. And it feels so huge and overwhelming sometimes, you know, it really does. But yeah, I guess, the best way, that was I guess to just narrow it down, I'm like, I don't think we can completely erase it. I could see us saying it wasn't true, or like half true, or twisted and distorted, but it's kind of, then it leaves us with, well, where do we go from here? And you do kind of need it as a foundation to help explain so much of the programming that we have on the planet currently, because it's acting itself out. And I think it's very possible that the gods were us, early humans. Like, they created these stories, it projected it forth, and it so I've been doing a lot of study work with ancestry, DNA, epigenetics, just kind of out of my own curiosity to help connect all of this together too. And integrating where I've been with law of attraction, quantum physics, because I literally think I don't think that there's one stream that has all the answers, right? I literally feel you have to bring the whole tapestry together to get to the answer. And at the end of the day, it's really, we have to wake up to personal responsibility. And then we also have to get real with ourselves and our scapegoatism. Because sometimes when we're faced with the truth, it does feel so overwhelming that we do nothing, because we're like, oh, it's too big now. But you got to sit with it. You feel that, but then you got to come to the point before you die of like waking up, like, we're creating this.
Well, let me ask this, do you believe in the power of prayer?
I do, because I've seen it. I've literally seen it. But I've also had experiences where the outcomes aren't what you expect, you know? And like, kind of what you shared before, what I'm sitting with my journey and that experience, it's almost like, I can't even tell you if I like trust. It's kind of like sitting on the outside now of like, okay, I'm seeing all of this, and I don't know if I can go back to this relationship here. I don't know if I can go over here. I got to really sit and look at it all. Because if I literally, at the end of the day, took my past journey and experience, it's like I fell in love with a spiritual guru. I got love bombed. I left everything for my guru, followed his teachings to the core, drank the blood, you could say, and my family's dead. Okay. Like, I could literally say that on so many levels, because I started this journey with a lot of what you said, you know, God's going to break through, God's going to heal, God's going to restore all the years that the locusts have eaten. I stayed on this path very faithfully for my entire adult life thus far. And I have literally, during my tribulation deconstruction period, my brother died of a drug overdose. I have a brother-in-law who died. I have a cousin who died. I mean, like, there are literal, all of the prophetic promises that I was given for ministry, my own personal family. I literally went through experiences where I was outwardly seeing manifestations of it looking like God was breaking through, about to do a miracle. and literally it all came crashing down. And then you have the paradigm of like Satan.
Of course,
Right?
there's always an explanation.
And really, it's like, boy, that was really exhausting at the end of the day, because I'm fighting. I'm still like, and did I gravitate toward it because of my childhood experiences? It's like, I'm still in fight or flight. I have to fight for my family. I have to fight for my destiny. I have to fight against this enemy that I can't see. So I've been navigating shadow work. I've been, Carl Jung, kind of like, integrate all these other things to just kind of, it's like a pause. It's like, all right, let me not be afraid of the dark anymore. Let me actually really see what's here. And how is this affecting my outer reality? I hope that makes sense. But
yeah, you brought up some topics I'm not familiar with. I'm gonna have to look those up. I'm not familiar with the shadow work, but that's interesting.
Neither, it's kind of new. It's pretty new for me, probably like this past year. Yeah. So.
Well, I know I took us into some very deep questions, and I hope it was okay that I asked some of those. But I do want to end this with a subject that is more near and dear to your current work, which is sexuality. And you mentioned that you had gotten accreditation, your certification for that. I did just want to ask, pardon my ignorance, but what does a sex coach do? Like, are you more like a counselor, or is like, how does it, like, what do you actually do with that when you get to use it?
So a coach is, no, I'm not a certified counselor. There are coaches who are counselors, and that's a completely, so therapy, counseling, all of that are separate certifications and training.
Okay.
So even though I'm very familiar with those realms based on experience, I'm not licensed in those areas. So I could not technically, I mean, I could use some knowledge from it, but I'd have to say I'm not that. And if issues arise that need to be dealt with in those areas, I refer you out. Right. Unless I become trained professionally in trauma-informed work, I can tell my clients about that, but I'm not equipped to fully work with them. So a coach, I would be working with somebody who's worked through their deeper issues. Okay. If they have trauma in their past, they've gone through therapy, counseling, so on and so forth. And I'm meeting them at the place where they're ready to safely explore their sexuality where they're at. Based on whatever they're coming to me with, could it be, erectile dysfunction, or just skills in intimacy, communication skills. I just literally want to be a better kisser. It's very straightforward. And I think for me, what I'm navigating through personally is I want to get through this process that I am in, so I can be a clear container for my clients in that area, because I am such a deep person. And I have to kind of remember that, like, I'm in a coaching relationship with you. I'm not. Yeah. And I do believe I'll be integrating these other things, though, spirituality, so on and so forth. And I do feel that those are the types of people I'll primarily be working with because of my life experience. I can't separate that. And I definitely want to work with people who have had trauma and who have been in kind of some of these religious paradigms that have been very damaging. I really want to see people healed in these areas, but I need to also let myself go through the process, I need to. So I'm really in this season of allowing myself to experience some things that maybe I didn't get to experience because of my path, which will only make me a better coach at the end of the day. So
would it be fair to say, and I just, again, exposing my ignorance of that that particular position, but would it be fair to say that it's not as heavily on sex in a sense of the literal act of sex, but more like intimacy? Like, it's not like, hey, you're having good sex, let me teach you how to have great sex. It's more like how to be just a whole person in an intimate relationship. Is that fair to say?
Actually, I would say yes and yes.
Okay.
I would actually.
Okay, so both. Okay.
It's like how to improve your sex life on every level with that included.
Okay.
Really, you can't separate the two. You can't separate mind, body, spirit, no matter what. Even if you don't, it's just your spirit, like the essence of who you are, not necessarily a higher force outside of yourself, but like, what is the spirit of your sexuality? What is how do you think about sex? How do you feel about sex? What are your mindsets? We dig into that too, to see what blocks. There's deep rooted beliefs we could have that could be hindering the expression of your sexual intimacy in other areas, because you have a deeply rooted belief. And in coaching, we'll tackle that belief. We'll look at it and we'll see how we can move past it so you can have another experience.
Do you find that as you talk to Christians about it, that there are themes that tend to arise in terms of roadblocks to it being a great part of their life? Like for example, we touched on the shame culture earlier, or purity culture. Is there any kind of other topics that tend to arise that come to the surface, as far as you know, not necessarily just in your experience, but just in people that deal with this that tend to come up? Like I'm just guessing here, but I would guess some people have a real problem with self-pleasuring, and also I would wonder if for people that have deconverted, if there's issues of, well, if there's no God and there's no sin, then that has some implications, such as, is polyamory now an option? Like, what kind of issues and topics tend to come up in the realm that you deal with?
I haven't taken on any one-on-one clients yet, but I can talk from just my experience with people I know, and I'm going to straight up say there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of issues, because even the belief around self-pleasuring has so ruined marriages that people have literally had affairs because they can't control the fact that they've met somebody that has sparked such an intense fire within them. There's a lot needs to be unpacked around lust and pornography. It's a huge issue. I actually feel like there's a lot of hurdles that need to be addressed for people to feel comfortable with coaching on some of these levels. Now with polyamory, I don't know.
That's probably a topic for another day.
That's especially within the church, which could go, because we have we got Mormons and we have other branches within Christianity.
Where it's already happening. Yeah.
And there's so much there. I mean, so another layer of this is really also our masculine and feminine polarity, which interestingly, what I'm encountering as a new coach, there's a whole niche on masculine and feminine polarity that I didn't even realize. And it interestingly sounds very much, they don't come across as Christian coaches, but boy, it is just completely in that paradigm. And I'll say this too, with Christianity, I actually, so as I've been more educated about kink and BDSM, Christians don't even realize the depth of how much their teachings reflect BDSM. Specifically, domination and submission. And I think that some education is greatly needed within the body of Christ and power dynamics. So
I have to pick your brain on that, because that's a fascinating topic. I've never heard it described that way, but I can see what you mean. There's a connection there.
Oh, there's a huge one. I see it. I see it super clear on from the angle that I'm in. Yeah, they really do. And I don't think that they realize the fine line, really, because we could have a lot of leaders that literally have a kinky sexuality and they're gravitated toward this religion because they're so out of touch with themselves and their sexuality that they're subconsciously projecting their taste for BDSM within their congregations. And that needs to be brought to the light very, very powerfully.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I'll have to, maybe that will put a few of these topics on for another day. I was just curious, maybe a final question here about this topic. And then I've got just one more really quick one about the bigger picture, but the whole idea of normalization. um, I, I've I love the idea of people feeling like things like their desires are normal.
Mhm.
It is like a lot of men are shamed. You shouldn't want sex so much. Oh, but to normalize, I know it's normal. Um, Normalization in the sense of like your body is not a shameful thing to be seen. So, for example, if a woman needs to pull out her breast to nurse her baby in public,
Mhm.
that's a great thing to normalize, and for that to be
Right.
something that young people see all the time and think that's not weird. It's she's
Right.
nursing her baby, and for a woman to not feel like she's got pressure, she got to have pressure to cover up or hide it, go to the bathroom to do it. Just normalization of the body as art, such as you a lot of Christians, I think, would cringe at the idea of going to an art gallery where there's nude art, even if it's old Baroque art. It's like
Right.
very very old stuff, in an age that was very much in the age of Christendom or something. Like, still, if it's nude art, it's like, I don't know. And certainly modern fine art nudity would be more off the table for sure. But like, just the idea of normalization and the idea of being able to talk freely, to say it's okay to admit where you're at with things. And I guess maybe I'd ask, like, do you feel like some of this psychosis, or what's the word I'm looking for? Is this psychoses? Is that the word I'm looking for? Just the mental health issues, the struggles that we have, the unhealthiness, that some of it's just, if I feel like it's based in part on the secrecy of it. Like, and I want your feedback on this, but what I guess I'm trying to say is, like, when you train people to say, you need to hide. You need to
Mhm.
hide your desires. You need to hide your body. You need to hide who you really are. You need to hide the desire, the fact that you want to look. You as a man, you want to look. You're visually stimulated, and that's normal and good. It's not
Right.
something to say, oh, I'm ashamed of. I should be so, God forgive me for, I'm so sorry for wanting to look twice. Um, the idea that a woman could look her body as artwork, as often as displayed, and to think, if I'm not some picture perfect model, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean I have to hide. Like, just the normalization of what the body looks like at when we're older. Just the normalization that you don't have to think of, like, well, if I'm not 21 in a perfect body, that therefore I'm not a beautiful person. Like, just
Right.
normalizing the different seasons of life for our bodies, the different seasons of life for our desires. And do you see any kind of like issues where just the secrecy of it, where we're kind of driven into this closet of our own mind of, like, oh, I can't tell anybody what I'm really thinking, what I'm really like, what I really want, what would make me feel fulfilled. Just that creates, to my mind, I think it creates a lot of these issues that we see in people where they, I mean, I don't know if you've read about it, but there was even a situation here where I'm from, just 10 minutes down the road. A young guy killed a bunch of Asian ladies. Did you read about
Oh,
that?
yes, I did. I didn't realize you lived in that area.
Yeah, it's just 10 minutes away where he went to church.
Wow.
And like, I don't know the full story, and I don't want to read into it too much, but like, you talked about how he was struggling a lot with pornography, and that was just such a big issue for him. And I feel like, I know when I went to Bible college, the guys would often talk about how, like, when you get just the guys, not mixed group, but just the guys, it was like, let's talk about how we're struggling with our minds and our thoughts and our pure, the striving for purity that we have as Christians. And there was such a sense of, like, this is such a dark secret. Number one, don't let the women know. Number two, don't let your congregations know, because some of you guys are going to be pastors. This is
Right.
very private. And number three, you better keep this under control, because it will blow up and you'll become, the next Ravi Zacharias. And it's like, you familiar with that person? Okay.
Yeah.
You'll become the next Ravi Zacharias story. And it's like, you got to keep your secrets, number one, quiet, and number two, you got to deal with them. And it's never like, the narrative never seems to shift to, the way to deal with your secrets is not to keep them secret, and the
Mhm.
way to deal with your secrets is not to just be more holy. The way to deal with your secrets is to admit that your desires for intimacy are normal, and to find healthy ways to let those desires express themselves in your respectful relationships. But like, what do you think about when you see people with all these secrets?
They're not in touch with themselves. They're completely disconnected from their bodies. They don't know themselves first and foremost. So maybe the quickest way and shortest way to break all that down is we literally need re-education from birth. Like we as adults need complete re-education. We need to know our own bodies. We need to know about consent and boundaries and what that really is. And I believe her name is Betty Martin, is a very good teacher on that. And I want to like just affirm you of what you described with what you're doing with your daughters. That's perfect. Like having that teaching moment is exactly what we have to be doing at a very young age. And that's not even, sexualized per se. It's just, and then having that mindset in all things, having the understanding of what our body reacts to, right? So like we're all a clean slate, just like with religion or something. You could take Adam and Eve just as a picture, right? And you take all the stories away. Everybody's going to look at that picture with a completely different story, right? So we have a lot of stories about what you said, like all these things are bad, they're shameful, we can't talk about it. And then we have so many distortions that have come from that. We have to face those distortions while also re-educating, while also teaching from a young age sovereignty over our own bodies. And for the first 2 years of life, we're completely dependent on our parents. Like children are the ones legit who are 100% dependent on their parents. And so we need to create a society where we are teaching, we ourselves are gaining self-mastery to the best of our ability with grace. And we have to get this literally within our educational systems. And it just does feel like an overwhelming task. We literally really do have an overwhelming task, but we're talking about it. And then we have to look at what are we literally in control of first? Ourselves, our family environments, then our greater community, before we even turn the news on, before we even think about people that are 1,000 miles away from us. I'm not saying we don't ignore that, but we have to come to the reality of sovereignty within ourselves and then the ripple effect that goes out. So we do need science, we do need art, we do need all of these things. And then we have to know, what do we do about the abuses that have actually happened that do have very long-term effects, and what do we create within our society to heal that to the best of our capacity while bringing forth this new information. And we have to embody it. It's
Yeah.
I hope that answers that correctly, but I just think it's really about knowing our own energy fields, knowing what comes, not judging, right? So like teaching ourselves and the next generation to not judge what comes up. And that's going to take time, right? That could take a few months of a practice where you get a coach, right? To help get in touch with your body and its responses and have a safe place where you can just unpack that. And then how can you safely express that in the outer world? And how, and for men, and I'm saying this because this only seems to be like, really it's men and women, but let's just start with the men in pornography, right? Men need to understand they are 100% responsible for their bodies. They are 100% responsible for how they respond to that woman. If they can't control themselves, they need to remove themselves from the situation. They need to put themselves in a situation where it helps themselves. They cannot control the woman. Now, I will also say it's the same thing for women, first and foremost. But I also say this with also expressing we do have a responsibility to our outer world as well, right? So like, yes, we're 100% in control of ourselves, but I do believe those that have great influence do have a responsibility for how they express themselves, because even though we can say, parents need to control, what their kids are exposed to. Absolutely. Like, really no argument there. But you also can't stick your head in the sand that we've created a society of leaders being in a particular place, people who set laws, and then a majority of Americans, you're working 80 hours a week. Please tell me who, you know what I mean? Unless your wife's at home and you guys have a good relationship going on, who's monitoring those children? You cannot. It's unrealistic to say I can protect my child 24/7 during the first 7 years of life.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
it is. Yeah. So that's my loaded answer to that.
Well, you touched on one word a minute or two ago that I wanted, was actually going to segue into my last question, is just the idea of healing, healing from trauma, especially from religious trauma, healing from even sexual trauma. When someone is just kind of at the very tip of that, where they're saying, you know what, I have been trying to hold things together, and hold things together in the sense of like almost ignore it, like it just I'm okay, no, I'll be fine. And whenever we all know when someone says no, I'm fine, really, that often that's a hint that there's something else going on, and we we have those memes and jokes about that, but it's like it's real. People are often saying I'm okay, I'll deal with it, and they're not dealing with it, they're burying it, and we all do it. But for the person that is just at the tip of that, saying, you know what, I've been hurt either by some really bad sexual ideas. I've been shamed. I've made some bad choices perhaps, but someone took some, or maybe even a church took some immature actions I took, and then shamed me, hyper shamed me over it. Or, guys certainly deal with the shame a lot. Or maybe someone was actually assaulted, which we've talked about. And some of it's just the theological trauma of like, I just feel like I'm such a sinner. Like I need to ask God, almost like an OCD sense, like, God, please forgive me. God, please forgive me. God, please forgive me. I was like, that's that trauma that we have inflicted on ourselves, really, as a species. People are, I think, waking up to the reality that you can't just say, I deconverted. I'm done. I'm done with Christianity, or I'm done with shaming. I love being a sexual creature. I love being, I love that the fact that I've realized there's no God, it's mythology. I'm free. Like that's a really good first step, perhaps, for a lot of people. But for a lot of people, they have to, it's like a starting point, and then they have to like almost step back and be like, take a deep breath and, whoa, there's a lot of like, I'm unlearning, and then I need to relearn.
Yeah.
To borrow from Yoda, I think I'm doing there, but it's like, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of layers, like peeling back the onion. And my question is basically along those lines. How do you encourage, if not as much in a professional level, but just friends that confide in you, how do you encourage people to really start to peel back the layers in a way that's not too fast? It's not too like, let's just get through this and be done. You take a 6 weeks course and you're healed.
Yeah.
Like something where it's like, it's real, it's honest, it's genuine, it's as slow as people need to give people the freedom, the patience, the grace. Like, how do you encourage people to get started on that journey?
Start. I'm sorry, I don't have a profound answer for you on that.
That's good.
And what I will say is start, and you really literally answered that question
I'm sorry.
in the question. No apologies. It's you start and listen to yourself. Start and listen to your body. Go as slow or as fast as you need. Maybe there's some healer out there that can give you some quick mega results like they advertise, but personally, in my own experience, that no. There's a lot of charlatans out there too. It's going to be unique. And I know the suicide hotline number. I'm going to be that straightforward with you as you go on this journey. Like, literally put it in your phone, have your safeguards there, because yes, the healing process can get that intense, and don't pretend you're immune from that. And I speak from experience, not because I know how intense my own process has been healing from, that the rest of the world doesn't see. And two beings that once lived, that came to my attention when I was going through some hard things, is Psalm Isadora, who is a beautiful sexual healer who committed suicide in 2017. And Ida Craddock is a woman who committed suicide in the 1900s. I don't know the exact date, but she was an aspiring sexual healer of her time, who actually, Anthony Comstock was her nemesis because she was trying to get out proper sexual education to the religious community, and he was trying to shut her down with obscenity laws. And the process got so intense for her that she committed suicide. So I say that to say nobody's immune. Nobody is immune. Pastor, lay person, healer, like you need to start, you need to go at your own pace, you need to talk with people you feel comfortable with, have your safety guards, and don't be afraid to say if it gets too heavy, because we are in these human bodies and it does get too heavy sometimes. So that's my answer.
I like it. That's good. And I agree. Just to start somewhere. And I would add to, I think the going back to the idea that the onions, like just to realize that some of this stuff, it's going to come back and shock you. Like, I think sometimes, I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes somebody will say something, or you'll see a video, or you'll hear a song, and something will like reopen an old wound, and you realize, wow, it's never really been closed. And it's like, it almost, it shocks you, like, that really hurts me still, like after all these years. Shouldn't I have kind of been done with that a long time ago? And it's not necessarily that you're not done with it, but that there's still something there. And, a lot of this stuff has deep roots. And I think, you even talk to atheists who will say, they would say straight up, I know that hell is a completely made up concept, borrowed heavily from the Zoroastrians, and evolved exponentially through the Greco-Roman mystery cults into early Christianity. I know it's made up. I know it. But if you get it pounded from the pulpit, you will turn or you will burn. You can still wake up with night sweats from that, even though you technically know it's not real.
Right.
And, I do hear people, who are like physically assaulted, who it just suddenly wakes up, they wake up in the dark and it just terrifies them. Or people that, like, in a theological sense, the left behind thing, sometimes they'll walk into a room and like, they'll expect somebody there and they're not there. Maybe they're still, out at work or something, or they're in another room, and you're like, oh, they're not there. And it's like, were they raptured? And they know it's not real, but it's like, they still like take a,
I go through it still myself. Yeah. I've had moments like, we've all been left behind. We're actually in the tribulation right now.
It's real though, man. It's some of that stuff, like old habits die hard. And it's some of this stuff. I mean, it's a lot of it too, is that it goes back to another issue, which we'll save for another day, but childhood indoctrination is what a lot of this is about. If you can get these kids by 5, 6, 7, 8, you've got them. And a lot of this stuff, you're starting in with 6 to 12 months with the Jesus loves me, this I know, with the Bible stories, but kids at Sunday school, you're a sinner, you're going to hell if you don't believe in Jesus. And of course, it's packaged very gently for young kids, but eventually, when you get up to the big boy church, and you're sitting with your parents, like that there's meat behind the Jesus tells me this I know story, and it includes some really nasty stuff. And you get that in your head early enough, and it's really hard. And I feel that I'm probably not doing a good job of explaining it, but I'll just say it as give yourself the freedom, and I'll put it first person. I'm giving myself the freedom to admit I'm wounded in some ways. I don't want to be like playing a victim card ever, but I am wounded, as we all are, from lack of truth. There are people that have either actively or passively deceived us, grossly deceived us. And some of them directly hurt us, but like attacked us, but some of them just deceived us with lack of information or false information. And it happens for such a long period that at a certain point, you do have to just admit, this is going to take a while. Like, this is not going to be a quick and easy thing. And I was speaking with another gentleman, I think it was, Andrew Jasko? He's a counselor that I was interviewing a few weeks ago, but I think he was talking about if I'm not mistaken, sometimes people like with sexual healing, they need to just not be focused on trying to perform sexually, but just like to be okay in their own skin again. Like just like, I'm okay with myself. You know, it's not even like a self-pleasuring. It's just like self-love. Like I love being who I am.
Yeah.
And I encourage people, for whatever it's worth, let it be okay to not be okay for a while. Like let this, and that's, you know, even as like a deconversion, if it's not sexual issues with deconversion, it's if you've just left your church, you've just lost your church community, you know, maybe your family won't talk to you. It's like, it feels depressing, and it's going to take a while to rebuild your life.
Yes, it's not overnight. And there was a huge teaching, the blood of Jesus is like a magical fairy potion that takes everything away. I come, I confess my sins, it's gone, it's finished. It's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Wonder working power in the blood.
Yeah, no. And I agree with you in this process as well. I literally have triggers that come up for me. I had an old friend from my church life literally call yesterday. I didn't talk to him, but I felt everything in my body arise. Like, what do you want? What are you going to say? I haven't heard from you in 2 years, you know, and all my defenses are going up because I don't know what spirit they're coming in or what's prompting it. And, you know, I have those triggers arise with probably about 3 people that'll occasionally, 3 or 4 that might come and check in. And I don't talk only because I'm still in my process, because I love them so much. They were hugely significant. You know, I agree with what you're saying. They were family. Half of my family are, even my biological family is in this paradigm too. So it's a lot. Yeah. I feel like I'm literally very physically alone in this journey right now. I'm literally like in a process of, I've come out and I'm kind of in this void space of like almost like a pregnancy, you know, like that womb stage of what's on the other side of this, you know, where am I going to align myself now, because all of this is 45 years of my life. This has been my life experience. And then you have to decide, you have to literally, like you said, like relearn what is healthy for you. And I think even in my early years in this, you know, coming from a really chaotic upbringing into this was less chaotic, it seemed healthier than what I was in. But then now you're 2 decades later and you're going, wow, this was just a whole nother abusive situation that I have to unpack. And what is healthy? So I hear ya. I hear ya.
And I think you touched on a point too that I'll just highlight. You know, the idea of being alone. Some of it is there's no way around it, but there are different communities. If the best we've got is a Facebook group or something, try to find something. I mean, unfortunately, there can be some cynicism and snarkiness there too. But if you can find a safe place at all, man, it's helpful. And I know that for me, like, it's not like you want a church again. You don't want to replace pretend church with real church, but it's like you do lose community, and it's like it takes some time to rebuild it, but it's worth trying something. And sometimes, as much as a friend on the internet is, you know, feels like a million miles away, just knowing someone on the other side out there is saying, no, you're what you're doing is going through is normal, you're doing fine, and keep at it. It's worth it. It's worth it to have people cheering you on. And I know I've got some people that I've never met in person, and maybe never will meet in person. I hope I do meet some of them, but you know, they're awesome people, but I know that they're kind of cheering me on from a distance, and I cheer them on. And especially with COVID, you know, we all have to cheer each other on from a distance, but it's important to try. And I know we all hope that some of our friends and family come around to realizing that some of these old constructs are not what we thought they were. But some of those hopes for people to think like us or to deconstruct, they may never happen. And, you know, we have to be finding new connections to give, you know, some kind of support system. Because boy, if you're alone in this, especially if people are attacking you, it's hard. It's hard. So for anyone going through that, you've certainly got my sympathy, and I sincerely hope you can find some community quickly that can build you up, because it is important.
Yes. Oh, and I do. I have great online community actually, and it's been great connecting with you. I think we actually met in the same
Yeah, same group.
group. But yeah, like the physical, like having other humans, and which I think all of us are feeling this right now too with COVID. It's not,
Yeah.
we're all pretty isolated in different ways. But you know, it did, like that world did provide a sense of outer community. But it's so important to take this step and to be true to who you are. And I really appreciate you inviting me here. And it was great. I don't feel that we had any, it was very healing actually. And I don't feel like there was any dissonance about belief systems. And for me, what is healthy is important. I definitely do not demonize people who believe differently from me, but I am definitely stepping into an era of boundaries, healthy boundaries, and that could be with anybody from any belief system. So,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, yeah.
Well, I feel like too, we came up with some topics and maybe we can, meet up again in a while and dive deeper. I would love to hear kind of where your journey takes you, and I'd love to touch base with you from time to time, and do a follow up every year or so, and to see what things you're learning. And but I appreciate it, and I do certainly wish you success with how you're trying to turn this from just your journey to helping other people. So I look forward to seeing how that transpires.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And I thank you so much for the work you're doing as well, and stepping out and having these conversations and bringing it all to light, because we need it. We need it.
Thank you. Likewise. Well, everyone, we've been speaking again with Jenean Jessen. I'll include a link beneath our video of a different video she did with a different conversation if you want to hear a little bit more about her story. And certainly, if you start a website or anything, just let me know, and I'll add that to the link so people can connect with you further. But thank you again. Thank you for your vulnerability with sharing your story. I know some of these topics are pretty heavy, but I think people really appreciate hearing people talk about it with openness. And just look forward to the next part of the journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Janine.